they focus more in on traumatic brain injured people for sure. But they also train caregivers. They do a lot of the stuff that earlier iterations of mind body solutions used to do. So to me, like they're the group that we want to support in any way we can as they're going forward. So, and then on top of it, Kyla and her husband Adam and the family and the foundation is fantastic. So we're incredibly lucky to be able to be around such greatness as a representative from Love Your Brain. So I have a hard time. I love teasing Kyla because she never reacts. So the whole time I'm going to be trying to, as you know who I am, like I try to jab and get things and get reactions, and she's going to beat me at every turn. She's going to win. I'm not going to get it. So this is part of why she's one of my ultimate wonderful foils of my sense of humor. So why don't we sit up straight and tall for a second? So we're going to have in a second before we dive into questions, we're going to have Kyla talk a little bit. We all have, as runners of nonprofits, we all have like elevator speeches and things we say, right? As the intro, right? But I do have to warn Kyla. So when I was getting interviewed by Krista Tippett for at the time it was called Speaking of Faith, but on Being, she asked me that questions and I'm prepared to answer about my work. And I did my spiel and she patiently listened and she nodded. And then she said, "Now will you tell me the real story?" Right? And that's hopefully where we get to too, because there's always the working of a nonprofit, the working of any group, there's always deeper reasons too. And they're simple. They're not so deep. So that's part of where we're going. So Kyla, will you give us the overview of Love Your Brain a little bit, the elevator speech, and then I'm gonna make some comments about after I hear the elevator speech.
Well, it's such a delight to be with all of you. So thank you so very much, Mind Body Solutions, Molly, Bethany, and Matthew for inviting me and what I know will be um, a probably quite circuitous conversation, but really look forward to connecting and learning from everybody who's here. So my elevator pitch.
Yeah, but
Um,
now I love already. You see how she called me securitas because I've been famous for taking her like an hour on the phone with her and telling her everything I think. So she's already got me going here. This is good.
um, So, where to start? So, let's see. As Matthew shared, I'm coming from an organization that's very near and dear to my heart. So, Love Your Brain has been around for about 10 years. We're a nonprofit that supports people with traumatic brain injury, but now other forms of acquired brain injury, as well as caregivers to improve their mental, physical, and social health. And that can sound a little bit clinical because I kind of come from in some ways two worlds. I'm a researcher by training as well as a yoga and mindfulness teacher trainer. So a part of my world is really around understanding the science and practice of holistic approaches using yoga and mindfulness to support the healing journey after brain injury. But I'm also very personally connected to traumatic brain injury in our organization because we were founded by my brother-in-law, Kevin Pearce, who was a professional snowboarder. He suffered a pretty significant traumatic brain injury just before the Winter Olympics. He was projected to win, had a lot of just a very different life trajectory ahead of him. And when his traumatic brain injury happened, at the time I was dating his brother, Adam Pearce, who also co-founded Love Your Brain. And we had never heard of what a traumatic brain injury was before as a family. So sent us in a very different direction. And a big learning for us in the, few years after Kevin's injury was, although he received really excellent medical care up front, we were very privileged and lucky to have access to medical services. His healing really didn't stop there. And when he returned to what life was like for him in our community, faced a lot of challenges, really feeling a sense of steadiness and agency within himself. So, Love Your Brain was really founded to try and create spaces where people can come home to themselves through holistic approaches and build a sense of community connection. So, I've been part of Love Your Brain for really since the genesis from a very heart-based place, but then also have added a few kind of technical skills along the way to help build and bring our work into different spaces like the medical community and X, Y, and Z. So over to you, Matthew.
Can I call a timeout for a second? See, what I wanted to have happen was for her to speak for a while, to actually for you to like experience that you can hear the multiple layers of where she's coming from, right? And you also get to hear that she's not only quite grounded, but also has a very multi-dimensional view of what she's trying to help people heal. So when you hear about the healing journey and you hear like elevator speeches, I put her in a funny spot by saying that, but you can tell that it's heartfelt. She actually knows and has been very close to what a full healing journey is and that it's ongoing. So one of the things that's so unique about Love Your Brain is how they marry not only the research, and we'll talk more about that today, the personal part of the story, right? But also they're just some really smart eggs. Like right in there, like Kyla kind of knows her stuff beyond belief, right? So on top of it, it's not just that there's research, because believe me, I've met really smart researchers that don't have the personal component too and the firsthand knowledge. So, and the other thing that's really cool about Love Your Brain is that they're hip, they're cool, their social media presence. They're like, we feel like dinosaurs. The behind the scenes staff at Molly's laughing because and Bethany because we do feel like, oh my God, they're kind of our heroes on another level of how they language and put things together. Every time we look at their stuff, they just look so freaking cool. And then what's amazing is that behind the scenes, they are that cool, right? So it's not like it's a facade so Kylie, will you talk about the documentary quick just so people could watch it? It's a stunning, very hard moving documentary about the real story of severe traumatic brain injury.
Mm. So the documentary is called The Crash Reel, which was made about 4 years after Kevin's injury and eventually was nominated for an HBO documentary award and really shines a light on the impacts of brain injury for an entire family. And I think part of what's been really unique about the Pierce's journey is from an early age. So the Pierces have Kevin, so Andrew, Adam, Kevin, and David. And David, I'm sorry, Kevin is the youngest, David, then Kevin. And David has Down syndrome. So this idea of how disability shapes um, the way someone sees themselves and connects with a family, and really the love that is woven into a family that is supporting somebody who feels constantly different was kind of baked into how the Pierces supported one another and just created a sense of deep connection. So when Kevin experiences brain injury and faced a serious and lives with a disability, it's really, I think, portrayed in the documentary in ways that some families have found really helpful in navigating their own experience, learning how to love somebody with a brain injury who's quite different and facing how life is different now. So
It's David, the one that has the down.
David has Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the other thing about it is I got the honor of going back and presenting at their 10-year anniversary thing. And I got to meet all of them. And I'm going to tell you, David in the documentary steals the freaking show, right? His innocence and his love of his brother and his understanding. It's like it's a lens for all of us. One of the things that David and I've never said this to you, Kai, but one of the things that David's presence on and off in the documentary does is a perfect metaphor for a lens of how we all feel, the innocence and not knowing how to support, but loving anyway and wanting to help heal. So like in terms of like making a story, they didn't have to make it, but it's like he's and the family structure that was already in place. Kevin got really lucky, right? That
Absolutely.
had a family that was already any family I've ever met, almost without exception, that has a developmental or physical disability in the family. They're just different. They're beautiful, and they pivot and they support each other. And so again, now I'm back to serious and not, trying to like tease Kyla because it's so true. So that is an amazing documentary and it will help a lot of people and you learn a lot and you one thing I want to say about Kyla's husband Adam, who is also just a great dude, who is also not quite as good as Kevin as snowboarder, was really close, was basically a professional snowboarder too. This is the kind of support that Kevin got, and you'll see in the documentary. As I remember in the documentary, Kevin quits everything and goes to rehab and lives with Kevin during rehab for a year.
Yes, right. Adam puts his life on hold and then
Adam, yeah. And think about that level of support. He stops everything because he could see that there was part of his brother that wasn't coming out into his healing process.
Mhm.
And so what does he do? He quits everything and basically does it with him and gets him to find his athletic warrior to actually become part of what happens because I mean, I've never met Kevin, but I can only imagine the kind of grit and determination and discipline he has, to be that kind of level of athlete. So
Mm,
again, the family is amazing. And then on top of it, they make beautiful glassware, but that's a whole other part of the story.
mm.
So now does anyone have any quick comments or questions you want to write in the chat? Because we're about to pivot, but I just like listening to what she says. So that's the problem here. Like when she talks about this stuff. Anyway, if there's anything, well, otherwise we're gonna move on. Anything coming in? Pat, I see your hand up. Gotta unmute yourself. Yep, you're up.
What service is that on?
What was that?
What streaming service?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know.
We looked it up. We had people because we talked about it, Kyla, in my class on Monday, and it's no longer available for free. It was on Amazon Prime.
What I can do, we actually have a free link that we can send to this. How about I'll do that? I'll send it to you somehow. We'll get it to you, Pat, as long as we can keep it within this group.
What's the name of
Promise
it again?
everybody, if you take it, you got to honor it, right? Because she's given it a gift, right?
Thank you.
So, okay, that'd
What's
be
the name
awesome.
of it again?
It's called the crash reel.
Real?
And yeah, and you actually see the
Yeah.
reel of him crashing a few times. It's like really hot. It's
Oh,
like intense. It's so
okay.
it's so powerful. You're gonna be awed and hurt and weeping and the whole damn thing. It's the real deal. I can see why it was up for an award.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so now we're gonna pivot. Okay. So another thing I found fascinating in talking to and knowing Kyla, and by the way, she's when she was in our training way back early, she was when you lead trainings, you have all different types of learners in the room, right? And um, she was quiet, absorbing everything. And then when she'd open her mouth and she'd start speaking, I had multiple times I sat and think, well, maybe she should be leading this, or maybe she should be talking about this. So it's like and there's something about there's students that ask questions all the time. There's students that take it all in, and then the level they're processing is like, holy cow. And that would be Kyla. Okay, so now I want to pivot.
Let's pivot.
So, so no, don't worry. The accolades are going to keep coming. So it's part of my goal. I warned her before the call. I was going to try to embarrass her by being complimentary, right? Um, so she's going. You have a PhD in research, but you kind of basically did two, but it's on paper for one. And it was at Duke, right? Am I right? Is that Duke? No, where is
It
it?
was Dartmouth.
Dartmouth. That's right, Dartmouth. Yeah. So a lame school. Um, so so um, but your initial interest was in public health relating to women's issues,
Mhm.
right? We talk a little bit about that. It's amazing how the story unfolds and ends up going where it goes.
Okay.
So talk about your initial.
So post college, I was really interested in working in women's reproductive justice and health. So ended up working for a little while in an international NGO, doing more on the fundraising side, and felt just so called to being more on the ground and actually working directly with women. So moved to India, got a fellowship there,
So this
working.
she says it just with a phrase, move to India, because that's what people do. They just
That's
move
what
to
we do.
India and go help
That's what
women
we
in India.
do.
Yeah.
And did a lot of work in family planning, abortion access, and at the time there was defunding of the Susan of Planned Parenthood by Susan Komen Foundation for some mm, bunk research or research that actually wasn't true. So that for me was a signal that there was a lot of work actually within the United States that I could be a part of and contribute to. So moved back to the US to pursue an MPH in supporting informed decision making
Masters
and
in public health.
Masters of Public Health,
Yep.
yes. And at the time, that's when Kevin had his accident. So I was kind of on this trajectory to actually doing my MPH and then also wanting to go into midwifery. Um, and so I became a doula, really wanted to
Just kind of
work.
became a doula, along the
And then
way.
Kevin's accident happened, so was in a really opportune position because I had connections at Dartmouth to help build more of the research and scientific understanding of how yoga could be used to support the healing process after traumatic brain injury. Because at that time, when we were building Love Your Brain, didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We're looking at where there potentially were other programs that were accessible and effective for introducing yoga-based services for people impacted by brain injury. And although certainly there were kind of one-off small scale things happening, there wasn't anything that could really be scalable. And our experience as a family was that there's tremendous need. I mean, a traumatic brain injury within the US happens every 11 seconds, 3 million people at least, even though it's dramatically underreported. So huge, huge body of people who were not receiving adequate services. So my kind of career ended up developing a little bit of a parallel trajectory where I was working in women's reproductive health, but then also on the side leading some research to try and see how we could support yoga to be more integrated within the medical system and then also in community-based spaces.
So can I ask a question there before we go into that? Because there's a fascinating comparison between the two that I want to get to. But I want to now talk about you, Kyla, and go, were you just someone so you wanted to help people, right? And then you wanted to be more on the ground. So you have that personal thing going. You're not just a researcher, which is really important in my opinion, right? To be on both sides of that equation. Um, but and you're interested in public health already because you kind of wanted our culture to be healthier. Like what drew you into public health?
I think exactly as you said, both being able to support kind of systems level change, looking at higher level mm, kind of frameworks for how something can be replicated and made accessible, while also really understanding the lived kind of personal experience because the two often don't talk together and they also are both kind of incomplete information in some ways.
Yeah, so but you kind of went to school knowing you wanted to work for change in
Yes.
general, right?
Yes.
Started to identify women's issues early as the one, and then had this life-turning event, right, with your brother-in-law or Kevin
Mhm.
having his injury being connected to Adam. So then, were you always, how driven have you been as you're thinking about doing research to proving stuff, or was proving a necessary evil? Like, what was your relationship to research? Because quite frankly, I want you to know, everybody, like my body students went through a similar point um of thinking about how much did we want to try to prove and show yoga as an intervention. With other piece we haven't talked about is your relationship to yoga, because obviously if you're thinking about yoga for Kevin early, you already have your own relationship to yoga. But like, and it is, I want everyone to get how incredibly fatiguing it is if you're someone that's based in interaction and wine support on the ground level to go through and have the patience to develop a study, measure outcomes, and do all that. It's like if your normal room, I'm making up numbers, has this amount of oxygen, the oxygen in the room when you're doing researching is way less. You have to have long patience, a long view, and sustain, right? So the fact that a lot of ways I look at Love Your Brain is that if we had slightly more resources, but also if I would have had Kyla's willingness to do what she does, to go after the research and the space to go do a simultaneous path. So this is what's so stunning about Love Your Brain is that you have both paths going forward and they've made big movement in both. They're helping at the ground level and literally done research that's kind of landmark in traumatic brain injury. So I'm going on and on because it's stunning what they've achieved, right? And we should be like in awe. But were you a little girl that liked to prove shit?
Well, let me see if I can maybe answer both questions about yoga and proving at the same
Yeah,
time. We'll
yeah,
see
yeah.
if this works. It may not, but let me give it a go. So, Kevin, so I found yoga end of college, and what really drew me in was so I have a kind of history of being in a lot of competitive athletics and loved the sense of accomplishment, the physicality, the teamwork, the
I
competition,
ask what sports? I'm fascinated.
soccer, basketball, and tennis.
Okay, go on.
Those were like my jam. And and at the same time, a very kind of performative feeling in all of those sports. So working to achieve something, to have a benchmark, to get somewhere. With yoga, it was so liberating for me to experience movement for the sake of feeling what I was feeling and letting that be a source of curiosity, of discovery, of presence. So that was really powerful for me personally, and ended up studying, getting my teacher training both in Ashtanga and Vinyasa in India, actually, and then doing the Mind Body Solutions
While
training.
you're in India, or did you go back to do it in India?
Went back. I've gone a couple of times, has a special place in my heart. Um, but Kevin had no yoga practice before his traumatic brain injury and found it about maybe 2 to 3 years after. He was actually, he had a budding romance and followed his girlfriend into a yoga class. And for him, it was this moment of, or maybe several moments of integration, where he felt a sense of that spark of what used to really enliven him in and as a professional snowboarder, this kind of capability in his body, a sense of creativity, while also this steadiness in his mind that he hadn't been able to find anywhere else. So that's what really led us to having yoga as a fundamental component of all of our programs, which have evolved over time. And I won't, get into the weeds of them right now. But I think what we learned early on was, this question, why wasn't there a yoga practice or a yoga program within the traditional medical system that Kevin could have explored? Maybe he wouldn't have been interested in it, maybe, but it wasn't available. And so for us organizationally, this question of how can we both create access to programs within at the community level, but then also work at the medical systems level. And we knew we couldn't just go into a hospital neurorehabilitation setting and say, like, yoga's great. There's some research on it. There's not a lot, but you should just listen to us and our lived experience. We know it, but that's not their language. So realized that we needed to have some way of contributing to evidence-based practice to then have a platform to advocate for why this would be worthy of adding to clinical services. So for me, kind of coming back to this proving question, I come from my parents. My dad is a child psychiatrist. My mother is an adult psychologist. Heavy emphasis on analytical thinking, education, um, using executive functioning to get us places. There's a funny comment that one of my teachers, Jonathan Faust, says that our body is just there to carry our heads around. Like that was my experience for me. Like everything was in my head until really I found a yoga practice. So there is a part of me that's really kind of determined to utilize and leverage the amazing capacities of our mind to help produce research that can hopefully change the scientific understanding of why these practices should be not just an adjunct, but a
Hmm.
core.
Yeah, that's awesome. One thing I want to step back to just a second, which is just to affirm, I'm imagining this moment that Kevin had in a yoga class, right? Where all of a sudden a whole bunch of threads of his life came together. And I remember, and with all of you on the call, in a way, I have the same. I have a similar experience. Obviously, not. I was only 13, and I wasn't a professional elite athlete the way Kevin was. But I remember having an insight that I think that too many people give up on too early. I was a very athletic little boy, and what I realized in yoga, when I started practicing yoga, I missed my body, and I wanted to feel my body more. I had been told to where a little bit of our, well, I don't forget that, but like I was kind of told to overcome my disability. What I found in yoga was that a really moving realization that it wasn't that I was a gifted athlete, it's that my consciousness had potential in it. What made me a good athlete was a certain integration between mind and body. And it wasn't the athletic skills. The athletic skills were a symptom of it. And I think too many of us give up on our mind-body relationship a little quick because we judge it in terms, well, can I throw a ball? Can I catch this? Can I do that? Do I have the competitive drive? When in fact, a gifted mind-body relationship, that's what I came to the conclusion at 25. A gifted mind-body relationship combines sensitivity, the ability to sense, to feel, to be more open to the space around you, to do some things, to do so while being grounded. The basic skills that make a good yoga student and a good athlete and a more integrated consciousness is available to almost everybody here on the call, right? And so we tend to discard it too quickly. And so, And the other thing, what one of my favorite lines in Waking is that I write a line about athletics is sensual beauty disguised as competition. It's so much more about sensual beauty. And so one of the reasons why we want to emphasize body to mind sensations at Mind Body Solutions is to help you remember that sensual beauty, the feeling of your body in relationship even to picking up a glass of water, it can be beautiful. And that's of something that's available for everybody. All right, so back to wanting to prove stuff. So my point is, I hope all of you on the call listening to this stuff, what she's saying, are will be more open to the gifts that are waiting for you in your own mind-body relationship. So you decide to you're you want to make systems change too. So you're not just wanting to help, you know, onesie twosies. You're trying to make bigger change, but you then also see a a relationship between this is what I was in our conversation last week really got me thinking about a relationship between the situation that your PhD dissertation or papers were about women in the first trimester considering abortion, right?
Hmm.
And that she saw this is so great. So she's getting trained in methodology, but she saw an analogy, as I understand it, between the situation that a woman making that decision and someone who's recently injured with a traumatic brain injury. So she adapts the methodology that she developed for the women's intervention, for the research to traumatic brain injury. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, a few things. I think many people, when I share this, are like, that seems like a pretty big jump. And one thing that has felt very true is that when anyone is considering how they want to make decisions about their body, and particularly in the situation of an unintended pregnancy and the choice of whether to keep your baby or to have an abortion, there's a lot of potentially stigma and a sense of mm, inability to talk about the situation and how that can feel very alone and othering. And with traumatic brain injury, there also can be this real feeling of isolation and othering because identity often changes. Certain things that used to be really part of who you are, your job, your relationships, the spaces that you move through are no longer available, accessible, or necessarily understanding of your experience. So, also a sense of isolation and stigma. So, felt like the kind of populations actually shared to some extent some similarities. So, that's kind of the space that I want to work in is how to support people who may think they are a certain way, rediscover who they are, and remember the real goodness that's there. And then methodologically, yes, learned a bunch of skills for how to use validated measures to assess whether changes in different outcomes were actually due to an intervention versus other sources of bias. So was really kind of positioned to be able to take what Love Your Brain was doing. And at that time, we were fortunate where we partnered with about 60 yoga studios and 30 neurorehabilitation facilities to build a yoga program and integrate it for usually about 2,000 people a year. So knew that that was happening on the ground, people were benefiting, and so was able to apply some research methods to be able to analyze what was happening to then contribute to research. So for me, it's been a little bit, I'm not doing research to try and get an answer. I've been more able to offer a yoga intervention or program and then layer research on top so that we could very nimbly get services to people who we know will benefit from them and then look at what's happening.
And this is what's so important, in my opinion. I'm saying this to the group, why it's so unique to have a marriage between someone that has personal experience in watching the healing process and the places where Kevin's story fell through the cracks and he wasn't supported enough in certain places, and marrying it with the academic awareness and the brain and the analytic brain that's willing to figure out an intervention, and then already leveraging love your brain. Again, I just love unpacking the threads of what amazing love your brain is, and then having relationships with facilities and interventions where she can offer a test group, develop a thing, and already has access to people that will follow the protocol to be able to follow the research. So it's like there's an extraordinary amount of threads and unique threads that happen that make this research that is, and didn't you tell me that in terms of amount of data and data points and research on intervention, Love Your Brain has some of the most robust research of for traumatic brain that's out there, didn't I hear that correctly?
Yes, yep, we've published the largest studies looking at the effectiveness of yoga for different health-related outcomes that have been published yet. So thanks to really our participants who have been, yeah, trusting us to experience our yoga programming and willing to share their data to help the science kind of catch up to what everybody on this call knows personally can be a transformative practice.
So then just for a second, I want to also say, and by the way, Kyla and Adam have three boys under the age of 8. Okay. So like again, try to process the world that is going on. So when I think about all that Love Your Brain has accomplished and what Kyla is doing, I say this with admiration and joking. It's like I think, and she's having to have gone to India twice and done this and done that. It's like, oh my God, what have I been doing with my life? Like, what the hell? I left some rocks unturned, right? So with that, before we pause into the actual structure of the research and their really unique intervention, let's just sit up straight and tall for a second and move around and like so, and I don't mean to be too barfy, but I'm just kind of happy that like Kyla's in the world and doing this stuff, and Love Your Brains out there doing this stuff, right? Because the marriage between the research and the evidence and what we know actually works, it's a hard one to hold together. All right, so just kind of open up, hit down through your sitting bones, find your core channel, right? And you're going to open it up and spread across the front of your chest, dropping the shoulder blades, and just literally letting this part, the center of your chest, come out into the world, right? It's easy to both admire and feel slightly like you could have been doing more with your life, right? And so let that go, right? Good. And then come on back together and then know that it's nice to know there are people that are doing all this other work. So I want to talk, Kyla, for a second here about three. You're in the we we hate these words, both kind of do, but the intervention that you developed using their words, right? I just don't like intervention. Let's call it a program. Let's call it helping people heal. Kind of mirrors together um, um, meditation, some mindfulness-based movement, and community. Three components are built in, right? Um, and so talk a little bit about like of the structure of what you all are measuring. Um, and we'll talk. Yeah, I'll stop there because I could ask a whole bunch of questions right now.
Sure. So, So we have a variety of different programs that use, as Matthew was saying, movement, breath work, meditation, some brain health nutrition, as well as psychoeducation, which just means education rooted in the science of resilience. And there's a really interesting book called The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges, written by Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney, who are two VA doctors that interviewed hundreds of people who'd experienced complex trauma and found in their framework there were 10 factors that people embodied who showed an ability to move through a time of challenge and find a way forward. So exhibited resilience. And I think one thing that's been really pivotal for me in Matthew's teaching is not thinking about resilience as overcoming, but more about integrating and coming home to yourself through a journey of change. And so all of our programs take some of these factors and integrate them into the sessions. So, for instance, our Love Your Brain yoga program is a 6 week program that has 10 minutes of breath work for nervous system regulation, about 40 minutes of mindful movement for mobility, 20 minutes of guided meditation, and then this 20 minutes of education. And so, for instance, one of the topics is this idea of realistic optimism. And this idea that when you have a mindset where you anticipate obstacles will happen in your life, and you can think about this for yourself right now. I'm sure obstacles are quite familiar to everybody on this call and how it feels to approach obstacles from a place of, I'm going to get stuck and bogged down by them, or I'm going to approach it with awareness and confidence that I can still find a workaround, even though it may not be that linear way that I was expecting. So that topic will weave into an embodied place. So, how does realistic optimism feel in your body? How does it feel in your mind? And then how can we talk about it as a group so that the wisdom of the group can help co-create different understanding and changes of perspective, challenge each other's assumptions. And that to me is the real kind of secret sauce for all of our work, just as you know, Matthew, when people with shared experience come together and talk about what's true, you can't get that in a medical, like in a therapy appointment in the medical system.
For sure, because they don't have time either. Not enough time to do it. So, but I want to just back up for a second. I'm curious if you have an example besides saying, I'm trying to imagine you in a training right now and you're leading a training and you say, you was the realistic optimism, by the way, one of the 10 things in that book
Mm-hmm.
that is a form of resilience. I just want to make sure I made that connection. I was right about that. So realistic optimism, and you then say you talk about it, you introduce what it is, which is like what you did, and then you said the comment, and then you ask, what does it feel like? What does that feel like in your body?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're facilitating, do you what do you say? What do you just ask? What does that feel like in your body? Or do you give them ways to create the sensation of realistic optimism using the body to help make the feeling more organic? You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying about the difference there? Yeah. So
I
tell me what you
do.
might do in a
I
train.
do. And I'm also very curious about what you would do or others in this group would do, because this is where the creativity of the facilitator and their own lived experience allows there to be kind of some magic in the room that can't be replicated. So for me, I think about an obstacle in my life. And one of the ways yoga has been really supportive for me is I have experienced tremendous social anxiety. And you may kind of find this surprising, just based now how I'm actually able to have a conversation with Matthew without my heart like pounding out of my chest, without sweat rolling
Oh,
down
I
my
can't
face.
believe I tease you. I never knew you had so much social anxiety. I'm just a
Well,
horrible person.
well, I mean, this, I'm I appreciate that this has been kind of a thread in my life, and I've learned how to manage and work with and also soften that experience so it's not so alive for me right now, but it used to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's a
so,
great line. It's not so alive for me right now. That's awesome. That's a great phrase. I might have to
and
steal that one.
thanks to yoga of helping
Mhm.
me integrate, like when so for me, noticing loud sensations in my body, loudness for me when I was feeling social anxiety was like what loud could be associated with a feeling of discomfort. So your question, how could I guide people to maybe explore this in your own body is to notice right now in, scan your body from your head to your toes and notice if there are any places that feel more intense or louder sensations in your body. And as your awareness moves to that place, can you bring a quality of curiosity or interest to sense where that's taking shape? And then continue moving through your body to land on somewhere that feels quieter. Maybe there's an okayness to this quality. And now, kind of zooming out, like you're zooming out on the lens of a camera, how might you be able to hold both of those quiet and loud sensations in your awareness at once? How both can be true at the same time. So let's all take a slow, full breath in, feel your lungs expand, and a long, easy breath out, feeling a release. And so for me, this realistic optimism is a little bit of like, it's real that there's something for me, a loudness or an intensity. And at the same time, I can shift my attention to notice other places and other information that allows me to be with that. So for me, that's how I interpret realistic optimism. Um, and it could be very different for others here, and I'm sure it is.
No, I mean, all of a sudden I want to sidebar and like talk to you about a whole bunch of things, ideas I have about how and I love how you do it. Um, One of the things remember and I don't want to go in, this is just going to be a comment. We're not going to go here. Is there's facilitating realistic optimism. It's built from mind to body and then from body to mind. And so the ways that you lead it, you're talking about scanning, you're talking about things like that. You're actually using a mental lens on
Mm,
discovering the body, right? So then you're getting I loved your word okayness, right? The quiet part being in having an okayness to it, because that's
mm,
like for the mind, because the mind can get kind of freaked out by the quietness, right? One of the ways that I think about, it's not the right word, but go there is I go to the quiet place first, but I have a lot of practice, so I'm not afraid of it, right? And then I see what bubbles up in my body, which is different than scanning, right?
mm,
Right. And so when you let the truth of what's happening, and I love what you're showing is the quiet place in our consciousness allows there to be simultaneous truths,
mm,
right? Meaning that, right? So you're teaching a level of simultaneity and the ability for our consciousness, when it's not simply directed by the mind, to allow for a simultaneity of awareness. And
mm,
they don't have to compete and conflict. And then you don't have to only pay attention to the loud parts, right? So
mm,
all that stuff. One of the things that I will then teach when I do my little bit of practicing in a little bit, and I want to go back to the three prongs of your quote intervention of the intervention, um, is that like I try to create that optimism. Remember, like I try to also teach conditions of safety from body to mind, right? So being able to be knowing where the emptiness is, where Shavasana is, for someone that's been practicing for a while, and being able to make the emptiness be full Like you can even do this on an inhalation. So the ability that you can affect and make the emptiness feel more full. And you can do that with your body and typically with movements in your spine or with movements in your breath.
Hmm.
Like, and it doesn't have to be the thing where you have to deal with what's being loud. You can actually just transform the stillness into activation, right? And that's one of the ways where so whenever that realistic optimism about the problem you have, and you're gonna get there, you could say a trite line like one breath at a time. But you could also say you're gonna get there, and you know what can happen? That problem can be there, and you can still lift your sternum,
Hmm.
right? So you start showing you can have that problem, and you can ground your sitting bones, and so you don't have to tense your jaw. You can soften your jaw, and you can be more dynamic with an inhalation there. You like so you start showing that in fact the body has the optimism because it's still living,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
it'll be living even when it's in the middle of the problem, right? So you start trying to trade on the back of the body, get a piggyback right on the body and not have to think about it as a mental concept. But let's go back to the three prongs. Tell me about your the structure of your classes, right? Are are you've got the meditation. Have you found when you're teaching the classes that people are gravitating towards the meditation more, towards the movement part, towards, would you say there's a community part, or do you call that just the learning part, the education part?
So I think the community part is kind of baked into everything.
Okay.
And yes, the group, the facilitated group discussion with the psychoeducation is where there's at least like the verbal sharing dimension of community. But to your point of like feeling and moving with each other in silence has a really powerful community building piece where people can be doing their own thing, but also seeing and experiencing other people moving together. So, but to your question of no, I think because TBI is so complex,
Hmm.
people experience often 50% of people experience mental health challenges. So, anxiety and emotional dysregulation are common. Physical mobility in terms of mental fatigue, of course, balance challenges, vestibular impacts. And then the social side, the isolation and loneliness is very much amplified after
Hmm.
brain injury. That people are coming in for very different reasons and resonating with different components. So I wouldn't say there's one that's the kind of front runner. All
Hmm.
aspects are important. And I think maybe I'd shared when we were developing the Love Your Brain Yoga 6-week program, we didn't have at the end a group discussion and education piece, but we naturally found in this study 31 people were kind of allocated to either a control or intervention group. After every class people wanted to stay and talk, so we baked that into the intervention based on our community expressing after feeling a bit more regulated and present, and my attention is kind of more in my body. I can then share in a more true and vulnerable way. So the level of connection after a yoga practice is amplified. So this is like the time to actually facilitate some conversation and deeper connection.
Yeah. And especially after they feel safe and supported, right? I mean,
Yeah.
couple things. One was, oh crap. Um, I'm remembering the one that wasn't as important. Um, the, um, it's gonna come here. The social piece, I'll just go to the one that's not as important. What's interesting to me too is that the social piece is huge. Oh, by the way, here's what it was. When we're talking about traumatic brain injury here and 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 the things that the isolation, all the stuff, everyone on the call, I want you to get that you already know this firsthand. That comes with any medical problem you have, right? The doctor doesn't understand. I'm in the middle of a problem right now that like the doctor's not getting what's going on. Like your family doesn't get what's going on, right? That isolation, the stigma, oh my God, here I am sick again. I'm embarrassed to talk about this. I can't even do this, that. So my point is that we're talking about traumatic brain injury, but we're talking about any kind of chronic, deep medical condition, right? Other than just a cold, right? That, and have you
Mhm.
ever noticed that no matter what you do, somehow, at least I do this, I have lots of medical issues, and it's like I blame myself somehow. Well, if I just could have done this, I wouldn't have been that, right? That's exactly happens with everybody, right? And so we're not just talking about traumatic brain injury here. We're talking about everything when it comes to health issues. So I want to make sure everyone knows that everyone on the call has got similar issues. Second, one of the things that I think is so interesting about the same energy that helps the nervous system calm down, right? And Kelly, you can comment on this. It's so interesting, the community piece. Like, so they're staying after, and they're wanting the piece because something in them has been opened up. That rather than isolation, the flip side perhaps of isolation is the desire to belong, right? But know that they trade on the same energy, right? The same energy that you turn and criticize yourself with and feel like no one understands you is also the same energy that can allow to let in community and support, right? It's the same. So one of the ways that I think about it too is that, have you noticed that Shavasana, you feel like you're receding in Shavasana, you're finding you're getting smaller and getting support and supported. But if you ever practice Shavasana when you're in a room with people or even on a Zoom call where you start to realize that Shavasana also opens you up more to the universe at the same time, that in fact, a collective Shavasana is also occurring, right? And so it's got two components. So what you think is just about your own body and your own little space actually is connected simultaneously. And you learn stuff like that in Shavasana, right? Shavasana has been one of the deepest learners for me of all sorts of things, but one of them, surprisingly, is connection in
Mhm.
Shavasana and what it is to be met in the vulnerable place, supported in the vulnerable place. All right.
Mhm.
Does anyone have any God, we could go on all day. In fact, I almost think we have to now. And I promise to be less circuitous when we talk again, Kyla, because I think that there might be some things we could trade some ideas about. Um, so does anyone have any comments or questions that they want to, because we're going to practice coming up here in a little bit.
There's
Like
a couple
things.
questions in the chat that I could pass along.
Okay.
The first
Do
is
they pass the mustard?
yes, they do.
Okay.
They've been vetted. I am curious if your research investigated any of the energetic or spiritual aspects of yoga and how that supports healing for people. That's the first one. We got a couple more.
Or do they not want to put their name to that question? Does anyone want to,
Oh,
whoever asked that question, do you want to enhance it? Because written and how you might say it are often different.
Hi, that was me.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Julianne. I'm involved in research of spiritual, energetic, what we call emergent phenomena
Hmm.
with the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. So I was curious if your research touched on like some of these things that have been previously lost in the West or not really recognized, able to be measured. I was wondering your view on that.
Well, it sounds like fascinating and important area of research, Julianne, and I have no experience with that. I think part of the value that I've been able to kind of bring to the research world is leveraging what's happening on the ground. So through our programming. So haven't slowed down the delivery of programming to try and back up and do maybe research that I would imagine probably takes a lot more nuance and I'm not sure what kind of measurement processes you even can. I'm curious how you measure subtle body and energetics, but haven't done that. And there's a lot that we can't even measure. So
Future
So,
direction. Future
yeah.
directions. But what do you think of that, Matthew, in your own
well,
experience?
I actually think there might be a ways to phrase when you're teaching, Kyla, I hate the word intervention, whatever the hell you do in your program,
Mhm.
right? I just, intervention
Yeah.
just sounds like I'm about to get hit by another needle, right? So I'm a little tired
The
of
language for
needles.
a certain place. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how do you teach any um yogic philosophy? Do you teach it as a spiritual enterprise? In some ways, even your tone of voice conveys that deeper melodic part of consciousness, right? And for someone that's having problem with dysregulation, you know what? When someone's dysregulating, I'm not going to use a harsh, crisp voice, right? Right?
Mm.
I'm going to do something else. If I'm trying to get them to push through their heels, I'm going to talk one way, right? But do you talk about any of the philosophy of yoga or some of the underlying things? I would think that might be a little bit hard because it'd be hard to replicate from facilitator to facilitator,
And I know
right?
there actually are some Love Your Brain facilitators actually on this call. So curious what
Yeah,
if either of you do. So in the curriculum, there isn't any, we use a bit more kind of Western application for this reason of how we can kind of bridge it into a bit more
that's the issue.
mainstream
Yeah.
and then have that be the entry point, but then kind of layer in based on what the individual instructor's kind of training background is.
So, so, so one of the things to answer when Joanne turned it towards me, I really don't want to project a belief system on anyone that's in my classes all the way. So I'm hesitant to go too deeply into some of the quote more spiritual side of stuff because I want to meet everyone in their own way, but I also don't want to have a certain belief system and certain belief adoption to be a prerequisite for being part of the mind body intervention. So yeah, I think you have to be really careful about some of that. Like this book I'm writing and finishing right now is like, um, I really did never use the word spirit, right? And yet it's going to be all over it. But I also don't want to get caught up in all what that means for different people. So I think it's really tricky, and especially with measurement, which is trying to be a study, because for good reason and it's got costs. Kyla's trying to publish, so you have to be really careful about the methodology in order to get it certain journals to do
Mhm.
it. So there's this is what I mean about the oxygen being less full for someone that's trying to do research from where Kyla's coming from in order to publish to a certain type of audience. And unfortunately, in the West, in the United States, a certain kind of audience is the one that controls the money, that controls the research, that controls the things, that controls the things, that controls the things, right? So Kyla has to play that game a little bit more. So it's tricky.
Yeah, there's definitely a taboo, but that's the purpose behind creating a new clinical subspecialty, which is operating like more from a ontologically neutral perspective, which is what
Yeah.
it sounds like you have, Matthew, which is really valuable because
Hmm.
that's exactly what's needed to create the bridge between the two.
Doesn't it sound to you kind of like we might have a budding new like developer of a whole subsection of clinical stuff?
Mhm.
Julianne, you got work to
Do
do.
And
it.
a lot of
Yeah,
the
I mean,
money
like,
is not coming from traditional institutions. It's coming from very wealthy people that have these experiences themselves and want to quantify them and help other
so
people.
the movement from this is a whole other fascinating conversation. And I actually like to have a conversation with this with Kyla too. It's about like how do you make the transition from subjective anecdotal information to something that can actually be repeated, but also what's the value of being able to repeat it? Maybe it's not as great as we think. You're so much in my wheelhouse of things I've thought about. Have you looked at any of the grounded research techniques? That's a
Not
subspecialty trying to
grounding, like
do.
earthing stuff. Like
No,
what?
grounded research is a form of research that actually tries to ask the questions before you make the actual survey questions. That's a whole sometime we'll have to talk about that, Julianne.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's
gotcha.
like a whole other way trying to get anecdotal evidence to have more clinical rigor,
Hmm.
right? And the problem is what's beautiful about consciousness is that it's not repeatable all the time, right? And so that's one of the problems you're running into. I've thought so much about this, I can't even tell you. So for
Well, thank you
another,
for considering my question.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
What was
Mhm.
the other question, Bethany?
Kyla, you had mentioned a book, and I was wondering if you could repeat the title and author.
Yes. So it's called The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges by Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney.
Could you find the book, Bethany, and just put it in the
Yep, I'll
chat?
put a link in the chat, everybody. No
Who
problem.
knows how people spell that name? And
And that
I've
is
already forgotten it already. They do have to work on their titles just a little bit.
that's what I have in the chat. I don't know if there's other people in the audience, but that's what I have from the chat.
Anyone else have a question before we go into practice in a couple minutes? Comment, reaction? Can anyone tell why we wanted Kyla to come on? You know, because it's like, holy, she's been
Um,
doing a lot of thinking about a lot of. Could you just nod to that, people, that you're happy she's been on the call? Yes.
well,
Like,
I'll say Mind Body Solutions has always felt like our kind of big sibling organization that we very much aspire to, um, yeah.
and there's also and
And
again, I want to support all that stuff. So find that I was wasting time, so anyone had the courage to comment?
Laura has her raised.
Laura has your hand up.
I was just going to make a comment that I really love that whole connection, what you're saying, like to the community. And I feel like that's always missing as part of like sometimes when I lead classes is like everyone's ready to come together and we're all like standing there at the end, like I'm like, leaving. And it's like there's always that after piece that I feel like is so missing in so many different layers. So I really love that you
Yeah.
incorporated that.
See, I actually think there's an interesting relationship between what we call vulnerability, what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, and then the need for community. I mean, in a way, you have to be open enough to let the community in. And once the community is there as a stabilizing factor for the empty space of the vulnerability, then it starts to come more and you start to heal. But and it's interesting, community does that simultaneously. A community does that after the community's laid over a bolster and got their chest open. There's a relationship to certain practices that invoke the body and support, that allow for the openness, that allows for the realization of company in the space that's quiet. So there's a whole bunch of overlap. Sarah, Elliot, your hands up.
can I
I'm,
just say
I'm assuming.
one quick follow-up there because
Okay.
I think sometimes it's also helpful. Well, it can seem a little bit nebulous, like what does it mean to build community? And research shows that it's not just about connecting you to externally to people who bring a sense of belonging, validation, shared understanding. You connect externally, but also it's, as Matthew was saying, connect internally, both from an embodied place, but also if you have a pattern, and especially after TBI, limits self-limiting thoughts become so much more amplified. So that's why a lot of what we do is both looking at an embodied way of connecting yourself physically, but also noticing what are those thought loops and how to interrupt them so that you can rebuild a sense of internal connection, agency, integration, so that you can show up with your full self when you're connected to the people who can understand you. So we
Yeah.
do a lot, Brene Brown has a definition of vulnerability, which involves risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And if you think about it in your own world, when you feel most connected to people, likely there's an element of vulnerability that brings this sense of I'm sharing something when there's a little uncertainty, how it's going to land, there's a little risk in what I'm saying, and there's a little emotional kind of spark to it. And that is what cements an aspect of connection.
So, and I completely agree with that. Those three words that Brene Brown, she's fantastic. Those all sound pretty scary. One of the things that I try to show is there's a way to facilitate that from body to mind. So you don't have to confront the words vulnerable. You can go like, wait, what does that feel like actually in my body? And my body can show me what it is to be open enough to receive, right? Like, and you can practice such things like go out next time the sun is setting and really sit there without just your head and try to let your favorite time of sunlight actually penetrate through Shavasana into your inhalation, right? You can actually practice stuff that's practical, that can be body led without all the mental uncertainty of it, because emotional blah blah blah, those are all true. Those vulnerable, those are all exactly true. And there's a way that your body receives energetically that you can work on both those issues too. Is that the same Laura that had her hand up?
Laura didn't have a chance to ask their question, so they're still
Okay.
waiting. Yeah.
And then Sarah still got a question. And then we do have to do something. We'll end with Kyla's teaching and come to my class on Monday for whatever the hell I do. Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of reflect from my own perspective that there were a number of comments about how the community aspect of your practice is so powerful. And I wanted to reflect on that also in the context of what has been said about trauma, in that from my own perspective, we are living in a very decommunitized world. The practice of community has, over the last century, really been deeply disentangled,
Mm-hmm.
taken apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you add to that isolating experiences, which I'm not even talking about disability, but in the world today,
Mm-hmm.
at this particular moment, we're all experiencing this fracturing and isolation in an extreme sense.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems that we're never in a room where we're not dealing with trauma at some level. And of course, when you just heap trauma upon trauma upon trauma,
Mm-hmm.
the creation of community um, seems to me to be the most helpful thing that we can do in any context today.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's why, Kyla added it to their thing. And I mean, once you can, yeah, I just completely agree. That's exactly right. Um, and then Sarah, didn't you have your hand up? Did you decide
Yeah,
to
I
pose a
did.
question?
Hi,
Um,
thank you, and hello to a fellow Vermonter. So I just wanted to kind of share that I've had a lot of like the same experience that you found, where there not being something available in this area. I go to Dartmouth, for a lot, and I found yoga many years after my surgeries, but I have a form of dwarfism. So I had a lot of surgeries at Dartmouth as a young person. I had joint replacements. And had I known about yoga earlier, I just feel like it would have been way better. But I think it's really great that you're building that there. And my hope is to kind of do something similar in the community that I'm building for people with skeletal dysplasia, or dwarfism, because we are having a lot of those same conversations that the medical world does not want to have, with people with dwarfism, specifically on people's decisions to maybe change their bodies, because of their dwarfism. And it's opened up this whole other world for me around disability. So I've been working on building a yoga practice kind of specific to people with dwarfism, because for instance, like chair yoga is not accessible unless you have a certain kind of chair. So offering something as accessible, and then, putting that as like, oh, it's accessible because it's accessible. It might not be to people with dwarfism because our bodies are just significantly smaller than the average person. So I just think it's great. And I didn't know, like, do you do any trainings in Vermont, or like, do you connect with people? Because I would love to chat more further off this call if it would be okay if I like reached out to you.
For absolutely. Yes. I mean, it
Awesome.
sounds like your lived experience and momentum and motivation are such a powerhouse for building something really valuable to many people. So let's chat and hopefully I can share some of my lessons along the way for how
And she has a great team too, right?
amazing team.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty
you're
sure that I think my dad also did the electrical in the Simon Pierce building down in Queechee. So it was
Oh,
just really funny when I saw your name. I was like, I'm pretty sure my dad did like work in that building, and I drove by it for years when I went to college in Castleton. So I'm familiar with Kevin's story, being a Vermonter and from the area. So it's great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
yeah, Sarah, by the way, I haven't seen you in a long time. You were like,
I know, I'm
is it
back.
for good? It's not because you're mad at us, right? It's
No, I
yeah,
just got super busy. I was not
that's
mad. I've been
good.
trying to find my way back here, and today I was sitting here and I said, I'm going today. It's always in
I'm
my
glad to
email,
see
and
you.
Wednesdays have not been good, but yeah, I'm back around. I started a yoga business here in Vermont. So I'm working on some
Awesome.
things.
Just good to see you again,
Thank
right?
you. I'm glad
Come
that
back
you're still around.
whenever you can and whenever you do, right?
I
That's
will.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so I think that um in the time remaining, we could do I think Kyla should do the guided whatever you do. It's called meditation, but it's more than that. So
Okay.
even what you did about resiliency and, realistic optimism, I like that word, right? Um, yeah, yeah. So, and then for some of the other stuff about, I'll teach something on Monday if Bethany will remind me about things I heard in this discussion from Kyla that makes me think about things that I could emphasize on Monday, right? But because I don't want to do a whole bunch of words after we end with what Kyla's going to do, then I can't thank you enough for being on the call. I don't know about all of you, but I found this being fascinating, right? And hopeful and glad that Love Your Brains in the world and glad that Kyla's out there putting together. She's like riding two different surfboards, right? And she's bringing it into a single surfboard or maybe two different skis that have two different minds and bringing it into a snowboard. Who knows, right?
Mm.
So that continues to amaze me, and maybe there'll be follow-up conversations because I think there's a whole bunch of things that we could keep talking about research, about all sorts of stuff. So no further ado, unless you have something you want to add before you drop the mic through one of your stuff.
Just a huge amount of appreciation to you, Matthew, for the unwavering confidence and encouragement you've had of me and Love Your Brain. It means a lot knowing you've really paved the way for so many people to understand themselves more deeply and especially support people impacted by disability to feel connected and like life has meaning. It's not at all how it felt early days for us with Kevin. So knowing
For
that
sure.
you've been doing that
A
for
whole
years.
other placeholder. I'd love to talk to you about what you think self-realization is and coming home to self. That
Okay.
was something I had to like poke myself not to get sidetracked on, because wouldn't that be a fascinating conversation for everybody? But yeah, thank you.
And
All
truly
right.
for everybody being here and listening, really, I know there's many other places you could have been right now. So thank you for your time and your care. So let's have a moment of maybe setting aside some of the thinking and processing mind and allowing things to percolate a little bit. So invite you to find a way to be in your body that brings a little bit of steadiness. So for you, that might mean placing your feet a little more intentionally on the floor, perhaps moving your hands by your sides or in your lap. And let's all just take a few moments to maybe sway side to side just to begin to feel into the connection of your body to whatever is beneath you. It's feeling this aliveness and solidity within your body. This might eventually arrive more in stillness, feeling a sense of settling down into your bones. And you're welcome to close your eyes or perhaps lower your gaze somewhere that feels steadying. And together, let's take a breath to gather our attention. Slowly breathing in, feel your lungs expand. And a slow, easy breath out, feeling a release. Let's do that one more time. Slow, intentional breath in. Long, easy breath out. Allow your breath to continue to move in a pace that's just right for you. Just noticing where you feel your breath the most. Is it as you breathe in, expanding throughout your body? Or is it as you breathe out, feeling a settling? It's bringing some curiosity to how it feels to breathe for you in this moment. No effort, no need to fix or manage anything, just following the movement of your breath. Shifting your attention to your arms. Feel gravity pouring down through your arms, from your shoulders, down through your elbows, all the way to your fingertips. You might notice any sensations of your clothing touching your skin, or maybe the temperature of air. Perhaps there are quiet places. There's the hum and aliveness. Sending attention down into your legs, feeling the solidity of support beneath you. Allowing and really trusting this support to rise up to meet you. And how you might also trust yourself to settle a little more fully downward. Notice the quality of thoughts that might be moving through your awareness. Perhaps you're feeling a bit more distracted or tired, or maybe at ease and focused, or anywhere in between. Your awareness has room for it all. Take another slow, full breath in, feeling your lungs expand. And a long, easy breath out. And sending your attention into the space of your heart, sensing any emotions that might be passing through. Anything that our conversation today stirred up or bubbled up for you. And how can you meet this with some tenderness and curiosity? And in your own way, sending yourself some appreciation for being here today, knowing there are many other places you could have been, but really sensing the goodness of your intentions to be here. Expanding your awareness outward to our whole group, gathered from so many places across the globe. And in your own way, also sending a little appreciation to them for the ways they have shown up, listened, shared, for their stories of difficulty and joy. And then also really feel and see how each person in this group is also sending their appreciation to you for all the ways you are contributing to this community. We'll place a hand somewhere on your body that communicates care inwardly, maybe on your belly, your heart, your lap. Just feeling the warmth of this touch. And together, let's take a final breath for all of us. Slowly breathing in, you might feel your heart lift a little higher. And a long, easy breath out, letting it go. And just sensing if there's one thing you'd like to take away from today's conversation, one question, one thing you'd like to explore. And then as you're ready, slowly returning to our group, you might catch the gaze of someone that I see and give them a little wave and a thank you. And until next time, thank you, thank you, thank you.